Brethren, welcome back to Master Craftsman Philosophy. We are excited to dive back in, keep digging deeper into the Lodge of Perfection. Again, if you're a member of the Valley of St. Louis, specifically our Master Craftsman Study Group programs, make sure you've read the chapter before uh, listening to this lecture and kind of working through it. Again, this is a big high-level overview of these chapters, just touching on what we think are the high points and the key details we think you need to internalize within our program. We hope you find some great use for it and enjoy as we dive in to the 12th degree Grand Master Architect, or as we now call it, Master Architect. Let's get going. All right, brethren, we are excited to dig into this. Hope you're ready. Not a long chapter, really, only from 257 to 270 in terms of what we're actually covering. Hope you enjoy this. Again, make sure you've read the material. Just fantastic content here, and I'm excited to share it with you. So, the 12th degree, an interesting degree. This is often kind of said, at least in certain circles, that this is the first of the esoteric degrees. I don't know if I would directly go into that mindset, but I do think that is a factor as this degree does dig down deeper. This degree is all about finding who is the new elevated superior replacement in line with Hiram Abiff's full role. We remember in the 8th degree, we picked out those 5 intendants of the building. They had specialties. They had certain things that they oversaw. Now is the time we get rocking. And now is the time that we pick one of those guys to be the full-on successor. And that's what this degree is about. It's a recreation, at least in some variants of the ritual, of that elevation. And we're leaving the tools of the laboring workmen on stone away, and we're going to the architect's tools. We're going to the big picture, mathematical, hard thinking tools. So we're stepping away from the material world more to that spiritual, that more mental, connected idea. And we have some symbolism from the 2nd degree in this. We're going to talk a little bit about the columns, things like that. Really a neat degree, one that I've always found interesting. From some general points, Bridge to Light will tell you that we learn the importance of a strong and knowledgeable executive in government, which makes sense if we're elevating somebody to a higher supervisory role. And then we, of course, are going to be learning here about the importance of the ablest, wisest, and best in every nation being our teachers, being our leaders, and setting us apart to that. So that's a big part of this degree. We're told that master architects should always learn, they should always be seeking wisdom and knowledge to try and better themselves, to make ourselves more able to our tasks ahead, and to focus on living for those around us, not just ourselves. In doing so, we're going to bring more honor both to our own efforts and those of those connected with us. So very early on, we're told in the chapter that the great duties that are inculcated by the lessons taught in this degree by the working instruments demands so much of us, and they can be taken for granted in the capacity to perform those duties faithfully and fully, bringing us at once to reflect upon the dignity of human nature and the vast powers and capacities of our soul. Let us begin to rise from earth towards the stars, from the hard material land to those of the stars. We begin talking about the plight of humanity and its efforts here, and Pike focuses kind of on the drudgery of our struggles towards light, towards God and the infinite, and the things we face, and to walk that slumbering conscious, or to wake that slumbering consciousness into life, and so to lead the soul to light is the office of every great ministration to human nature, whether it is a vehicle of the pen, the pencil, or the tongue. So here Pike is reiterating this fact that all our efforts in life are to elevate and waken our consciousness, to lead our soul towards light, and that we are probably unconscious of the intensity and the awfulness, the awful as an impressive, the awfulness of the endeavor ahead. Specifically, we ask you to look at a section of the text that tells us that we seem never to know what anything means or is worth until we've lost it. Many an organ, nerve, or fiber in the body uh, performs its silent part for years, and we're quite unconscious to it and its value. It is not until it is injured that we discover its value or how essential it is to our happiness and comfort. We never know the full significance. And so Pike here is talking about this idea in relation to our bodies, but he's talking about it also on the grander scope of things like, our property, our ease and comfort, our health, our parents, our ability to walk out the door every day and not be afraid of being harassed or shot, the ability to walk um, into your church and worship as you please. Our blessings are not only brightened when they depart because we realize how much we missed them, but they're an enduring reality. And the love and friendship we receive are everlasting, even under the cold and press of death. And Pike emphasizes this idea that our lives are full of challenges, but we need to realize the good that we have, the possibilities that we have, um, and not push those out of our minds. He then addresses this idea of the mysteries and our practices and our efforts, and he talks about the ideas of the arch of mystery is kind of the overarching thing here, and how it spreads over us, and we can be befuddled by it, perhaps. And in specifics, we're told that heaven is above us and eternity is before us and behind us. The sun and stars are silent witnesses and waters over us, teaching us that we are surrounded by wonder. We're surrounded by the beauty of the divine, and we should fill our lives with majesty and sacredness. Again, this idea of mystery surrounding us. We talked a moment ago about enjoying the things we have in life and appreciating them, realizing that they may be fleeting. Here again, Pike is talking about this fact that we're encompassed by, as he calls it, a dome of incomprehensible wonder in him and about him, which should fill our life with that majesty and sacredness. Something of sublimity and sanctity flashes down from heaven into the heart of everyone who lives. There is no being so base or abandoned that has some trait of the sacredness upon him. And it's important for us to realize that connection and that belief. He's focusing here very early on in this degree about our lives and the connections and the positive things we are given and that we can interact with and how they interact with our life. Because he then shifts to talking about this fact that our life is here and now, and we should acquire knowledge and we should become helpful and productive and benefit society. But the fact that there is more beyond, there is something farther out there. Life is no negative or superficial or worldly existence. Our steps are ever more haunted with thoughts far beyond our own range, which some have regarded as the reminiscence of a pre-existent state. So it is with us all in the beaten and worn track of this worldly pilgrimage. There is more here to there than the world we live in. It is not all of our life to live. An unseen and infinite presence is here, a sense of something greater than we possess, seeking through all the void, the waste of life for the good beyond it. It is crying out of the heart for interpretations, a memory of the dead touching continually some vibrating thread that is the great tissue of mystery. How many in our times in that dire extremity have come, and would not one and another step forth freed from the vile meshes of ordinary selfishness like the Roman father and son and say, let the blow fall on me? Who has that willingness? There are greater and better things for us all than this world may take account of, and we must note it if we would but find them out and take time to have patience to them. Of course, it is one part of our Masonic culture to find these traits of power and sublime devotion, to revive these freighted impressions of generosity and self-sacrifice, the almost squandered bequest of God's love and kindness to our souls, and to induce us to yield ourselves to their guidance and control. Upon all conditions, men press down one impartial law. To all situations, to all fortunes, high or low, the mind gives their character. The king may be mean, degraded, miserable, and the slave of his ambition, fear, voluptuousness, and every low passion. the peasant may be the real monarch, the moral master of his fate, a free and lofty being, more than a prince in happiness and more than a king in honor. Uh, so here again, Pike is continuing this train of talking about understanding what we have in this world, understanding what is before us and ahead of us, and talking about this idea of control and understanding and utilizing the opportunities in front of us and realizing what there is ahead. Uh, not living in the world uh, so much, um, perhaps being of it, if that makes sense. And this idea that the peasant may truly be more of a master than the king. Of course, this is balanced with this idea of temptation in the world. Obviously, if we're talking about how those divides of the peasant and the king exist, and of course, man is no bubble upon the sea of his fortune, helpless and irresponsible upon the tides of events. Out of the same circumstance, different men bring different results. The same difficulties that could break down one man, build up another, and make him strong. It is the very attitude and the glory of a man that he can bend to the circumstances of his condition toward his intellectual or moral purposes of his nature. And it is the power and mastery of his will that chiefly distinguishes him from the brute. Let the mason never forget that life and the world are what we make of them by our social character, by our adaptation or want of adaptation to the social conditions, the relationships, and the pursuits of the world. To the selfish, the cold, the insensible, or the haughty and presuming, to the proud who demand more than they are likely to receive, to the jealous, even the afraid, they shall not receive enough. To those who are reasonably sensitive about the good or ill opinions of others, to all violators of the laws, rude, the violent, the dishonest, essential, to all of these, their condition from its very nature will present annoyances, disappointments, and pains appropriate to their character. To the gentle, many will be gentle. To the kind, many will be kind. A good man will find that there is goodness in the world, and an honest man will find that there is honesty in the world, and a man of principle will find principle and integrity in the minds of others. Yet the offer of a dishonest gain and guilty pleasure makes the honest man more honest, and the pure man more pure. They raise virtue to the height of towering indignation. The fair occasion, the safe opportunity, the tempting chance becomes the defeat and disgrace of the tempter. The honest and upright man does not wait until temptation has made its approaches and mounted its batteries on the last parapet. The business of the world absorbs, corrupts, and degrades us, and degrades one's mind, while in another it feeds and nurses the noblest independence, integrity, and generosity. Pleasure is a poison to some, and healthful refreshment to others. To one, the world is in great harmony, like a noble strain of music, which infinite modulations occur. To another, it is a huge factory, the clash and clang of those whose machinery jars upon the ears and frets them to madness. Life is sustainably the same thing to all who partake of it. Yet some will rise to virtue and glory, while others will undergo the same discipline and enjoy the same privileges, but they shall sink to shame and perdition. Considering this existence that Pike's talked about, this fact that we should appreciate what we have, this pursuit of what lays ahead of us, understanding the temptations before us, one might challenge the concepts of what does divine truly, the divine truly have in store, awaiting to us. And Pike begins to contemplate this idea of the divine's presence and his care for us, his devotion to us. And he tells us, believe that there is a God, that he is our Father, that he is a paternal interest in our welfare and our improvement, that he has given us powers by means of which we can escape sin and ruin, that he has destined us for a future of endless progress towards perfection and a knowledge of himself. Believe this, as every Mason should, and you can live calmly, endure patiently, labor resolutely, deny yourself cheerfully, hope steadfastly, and conquer all the greatest troubles in life. Take away one of these principles, and what remains of us? Say that there is no God or no way to be opened for hope and reformation and triumph, no heaven to come, no rest for the weary, no home in the bosom of God, and you will set yourself asunder. In this same context, Pike draws us to further understand that the idea of the divine in the context of religious faith forms a foundation which makes it indispensable to Masonry. The religious faith thus taught by Masonry is indispensable to the attainment of the great ends of life, and must therefore have been designed to be a part of it. We are made for this faith, and there must be something somewhere for us to believe in. We cannot grow healthfully nor happily without it. It is therefore true. If we would cut off from any soul all the principles taught by Masonry and the faith in God and immortality and virtue and essential rectitude, the soul would then sink into sin, misery, darkness, and ruin. If we would cut off all the senses of truth, the man would sink at once to the grade of an animal. We must of necessity embrace the great truths taught by Masonry and live by them to live happily. I put my trust in God is the protest of Masonry against the belief of a cruel, angry, revengeful God to be feared and not reverenced by his creatures. Society, of course, is the great relation that creates bonds between us, and it is much a creation of heaven as it is a system of the universe. It is that bond of gravitation that holds all the world and systems together, where suddenly severed, the universe would fly off into wild and boundless chaos. I think Pike, of course, here speaking a bit metaphorically. And if we were to sever all the moral bonds that hold the society together, we would cut off every conviction of truth and integrity from an authority above. Faith is a moral principle in virtue and in God. It is a necessity, and it is necessary for the guidance of man, as instinct is for the guidance of an animal. Therefore, his faith, or this faith, as a principle of man's nature, has a mission as truly authentic in God's providence as the principles of instinct. God has ordained that life shall be a social state. We are members of a civil community. The life of that community depends upon its moral condition. Public spirit, intelligence, uprightness, temperance, kindness, domestic purity, and all of which will make it a happy community and give it prosperity and continuance. Widespread selfishness, dishonesty, intemperance, libertarianism, corruption, and crime will make it miserable and bring about its great dissolution and speedy ruin. Of course, we as humans can't be unsensible and unsensitive to the things that occur around us, as perhaps the beast is. And we are not insensible brutes who can refuse the call of reason and consciousness. The soul is capable of remorse. When the great dispensations of life press down upon us, we weep and suffer and sorrow. And sorrow and agony desire other companionship than worldliness and irreligion. We are not willing to bear these burdens of the heart, fear, anxiety, disappointment, and trouble without any object or use. We are not willing to suffer, to be afflicted, to have our days and months lost to comfort and joy and overshadowed with calamity and grief, without advantage or compensation. To barter away our dearest treasures, the very sufferings of our heart, to sell the lifeblood from failing frame and fading cheek, our tears of bitterness and groans of anguish for nothing, human nature, frail, feeling, sensitive, and sorrowing, cannot bear to suffer for naught. And yet, the mind and soul of a man have a value which has nothing else. They are worth a care which nothing else is worth, and to the single solitary individual, they ought to possess interest, which nothing else predisposes. Men do not feel, of course, the worth of their own souls. They're proud of their mental prowess. But the intrinsic, inner, infinite work of their own minds they do not perceive. The poor man admitted to the palace feels lofty and immortal being as he is, like a mere ordinary thing amid the splendors that surround him. He sees the carriage of wealth roll by him, and forgets the intrinsic and eternal dignity of his own mind in a poor, degrading envy. And he feels as a humbler creature because others are above him, not in mind, but in menstruation. Men respect themselves accordingly as they are more wealthy, higher in rank or office, loftier in the world's opinion. They're able to command more votes, more favors of the power. Is that rightly so? Of course, here Pike is speaking of he begins to talk about the soul and its value and the fact that we probably don't completely value it to what it needs to be. And then he shifts and he talks about how men are misguided in seeing the baubles and fancy things of others and feeling less because others have more. And he shifts after that to talking about cognition, mental ability, and how it unlocks the treasures of our universe. And he talks to us that the glory of genius and the rapture of virtues, when rightly revealed, are diffused and shared among unnumbered minds. When eloquence and poetry speak, when glorious arts, statuary, paintings, music take audible or visible shape, when patriotism, charity, and virtue speak with thrilling potency, the hearts of thousands glow with kindred joy and ecstasy. If it were not so, there would be no eloquence. For eloquence is that which other hearts respond. It is a faculty and power of making other hearts respond. Interestingly, Pike sums this chapter up twice. And he ends his discussion on the eloquence of the mind, telling the brother, "My hope is that you have listened and understood the instruction of this lecture, this degree, and you will feel the dignity in your own nature and the vast capacities of your own soul for good and evil. I will now communicate to you the respective remainder of the degree." And then he kind of takes a little jaunt and he begins to talk about the symbols of the degree. He tells us that there's a transparency that hangs in the east of this degree. He says the Hebrew word you see in Old Hebrew and Samaritan characters over the 5 columns, which you also see, are one of the names of God, Adonai, usually translated Lord, and which the Hebrews in reading always substitute for the true name. So what you see on the actual star is the tetragrammaton, Yod He Vahe, but replaced with Adonai. He then begins to talk about the orders of architecture, which you also see displayed, and he references them. Of course, we know them as the Tuscan, Doric, Ionic, Corinthian, Composite, and that's very much true to this one in the Scottish Rite work, but here he assigns specific roles to each. The Tuscan is said to represent the 3 blue degrees, or primitive masonry. The Doric, from the 4th to the 15th inclusive, is the ineffable degrees. The Ionic is the 15th and 16th, or the temple degrees. The Corinthian represents the 17th or 18th, or those of the new law. And the Composite is the philosophic and chivalric degrees from the 19th to the 32nd inclusive. Noticeably, you note the breakdown there, representative of the old Scottish Rite breakdown in bodies. But I think it's interesting if you reflect, and I would encourage you to go back, open your ciphers, open your manuals, look at the second degree lecture and what's discussed, and see if you find any correlations you think there between that comparison. Of course, there's also a discussion about the North Star, another symbol of this degree, and how it is always fixed and immutable for us. And it represents the point in the center of a circle, representative of deity in the center of the universe. It is a symbol of faith and duty to it. And the 7, which are part of that constellation, which continually revolve around it, we see a mystical meaning attached, which you will learn hereafter. The number 7, keep that in mind. We're going to harken back to that multiple times. Of course, there are also 3 candles, which represent the 3 great lights of a lodge, which we're told in the Scottish Rite sense could represent power, wisdom, and beneficence of the deity. They are also symbols of the first 3 Sephiroth, or the emanations of the divine, according to the Kabbalah. Kether, the omnipotent divine will. Hokmah, the divine intellectual power to generate thought. And Binah, the intellectual capacity to produce it. The 2 latter are usually translated wisdom and understanding, and of course are passive, are active and passive, positive and negative, which we do not yet endeavor to explain to you, the work says. They are the columns of Jachin and Boaz that stand at the center of the temple. In other respects, the jewel of this degree is quite interesting. Upon it is Rob Benayam, and we talk here about the chief of the architects, symbolizing the constitutional executive or head of a free government. And in this degree, it teaches us that there is no free government that can long endure when the people cease to select their magistrates from the best and wisest of men, and pass over those men for those who are probably low and noble, um, and then commit to their hands that destiny. We are told that after all, it is a divine right to govern, and it should be vested in the ablest and noblest of men. We close this lecture with a welcome, inviting you to join us in this peaceful retreat of virtue, to participate in our privileges and to share in our joys and sorrows. Which I think is interesting because this degree focuses, of course, on understanding oneself in the scope of existence. Of course, I told you this degree is all about acquiring knowledge and wisdom, but very much the lecture of this degree is focused on realizing that knowledge is here and now, that there is something beyond, that God's place in it, and our understanding of that and our place in the world. I would encourage you to look to several things, consider in what sense there is a divine right to govern. Um, Consider some of the comparisons Pike makes between humans and brute beasts. Do you feel men are worthy of their souls? What evidence is there of this value of the soul? And explain perhaps what is meant by life is what we make of it. These are kind of the points to consider as we go through this material, and as we explore the master architect. My brothers, thank you for joining us again for Master Craftsman Philosophy. We are excited to have you here as part of today's discussion. Again, if you're a part of the St. Louis group, make sure you've read the material before you did listen to this. It's already too late by chance. But we look forward to diving into the next section. This does complete the section of work covering the 9th through 12th degrees. And our next section will be the 13th and 14th, covering Royal Arch Solomon and Perfect Deluge. Have a great rest of the evening, day, or wherever it might be in your time. Have a good one, brothers.